Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. NATO Article 5 is still binding, but more defense spending is needed. This is the main message coming from Brussels following today's meeting of the pact's top diplomats. More on that in a moment, but first, the latest headlines. American soldiers will remain in Europe, with more F-16s due to arrive in Ukraine. 6 Ukrainian children killed in a deadly Russian strike. And Poland strikes back at illegal migration with a social media campaign. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has once again urged NATO member states to increase defense spending. Poland is already the leader in this regard among NATO countries and plans to allocate 5% of its GDP to defense in 2026. Our EU correspondent Alex Kadia reports from the Belgian capital.
Well, from the perspective of a lot of European allies, this two-day meeting would have gone better than expected. They received reassurances from Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, on the US's support and commitment to the NATO alliance, and to the United States its commitments within the NATO alliance, saying that it was more active than ever within NATO. We even heard the French foreign minister joking at the expense of the Americans, saying it's now easier to hit GDP targets in defense spending because the US had crashed the global economy. Now, a brief joke made by the French for a very serious matter, reiterated by Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, who said that European powers and Canada have to step up their defense spending, particularly under pressure from the United States.
Allies heard a very clear message from Secretary Rubio about US commitment to NATO, and also a very clear expectation that Europe and Canada must take more responsibility for our shared security and continue to ramp up defense spending.
Leading the pack, of course, Poland, hitting 4.7% of GDP this year in spending, committing to hit 5% in 2026.
We have doubled our spending on defense since Donald Trump took office for the first time. That's impressive. We are going to spend another 800 billion from EU funds. We are doing a lot. We'll do even more. And the tariffs, I understand, are being imposed because Europe is actually very successful and has a trade surplus. But we hope that the United States will also take into account the fact that the US, on the other hand, has a huge surplus in services.
Certainly something to watch in the coming months, in the coming years. European powers will have to ramp up their defense spending within NATO as quickly as possible. Alex Kadia, TVP World, at NATO headquarters in Brussels.
US President Donald Trump has confirmed that Article 5 of NATO remains in place, said Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski after the meeting of the alliance's top diplomats in Brussels on Friday.
It's good that the new US government has realized that allies are an asset and not a burden, as they were an asset, and I said that during my talks, when for the first time, and thank God, so far for the last time, the alliance had invoked Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which was for the benefit of the United States. We, as Poland, had no national interest in Afghanistan. We responded out of friendship and solidarity as an ally towards the United States. Yes, President Trump confirmed to other leaders that it still applies. And from what we have heard, President Trump will be present at the NATO summit in The Hague.
US Senate Committee on Armed Services hearings have revealed that mid-level Pentagon officials have been considering withdrawing some of the American troops from Europe, raising fears of the potential consequences of such move. Despite the Secretary of State Marco Rubio rushing to confirm the US commitment to NATO, it seems that not all in the Trump administration may be of the same mind. Meanwhile, more American-made F-16s are on their way to Ukraine. Kazimierz Wysiak has this report.
On behalf of the United States Air Force, let's deliver.
With Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, there's been a level of uncertainty among European allies over the presence of US troops in Europe, especially after comments such as these.
If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them.
And now the latest session of the US Senate Committee on Armed Services has confirmed that at least on a mid-level leadership, the Pentagon was seriously considering pulling some American troops from Europe.
I'm troubled that this deeply misguided and dangerous view is held by some mid-level bureaucrats within the Defense Department. They've been working to pursue a U.S. retreat from Europe, and they've often been doing so without coordinating with the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Council.
According to Statista.com, last year there were more than 60,000 permanent US military personnel in Europe. Close to 10,000 soldiers are located in Poland alone. The importance of their presence cannot be overstated.
In today's situation, the U.S. presence mostly in the NATO countries, those countries bordering with Russian Federation and Belarus. The presence of U.S. troops is one of the key or essential factors of our security.
Despite some Pentagon officials considering the withdrawal of US troops, it seems top-level decision-makers in Washington decided against it.
We are as involved in NATO today as we have ever been, and we intend to continue to be, but it has to be a real alliance.
The Donald Trump administration has been systematically pushing for a ceasefire in Ukraine. But despite several rounds of negotiations and Kyiv's agreement to stop the fighting, Russia is still not on board. With peace talks repeatedly stalled by Vladimir Putin's hardline demands, the US is now continuing with its long-time strategy of military support for Ukraine.
There are more F-16s prepared to be deployed in there. There are more pilots in the training pipeline, sir. I can give you the numbers in closed session. They are active.
The advanced US-made F-16s are heavily desired by the Ukrainians, especially compared to the Soviet-era MiG fighter jets, commonly used by the Russians. But this latest announcement has a double meaning.
We need more fighter jets and many more. But it's also very important symbolically, showing that United States still is with Ukraine, still supplies to Ukraine what was promised.
As the peace in Ukraine is still nowhere to be seen, the Trump administration is reportedly growing more and more frustrated over Moscow's tactics.
President Trump's not going to fall into the trap of endless negotiations about negotiations. We will know soon enough whether or not Russia is serious about peace.
The future of the talks may be shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing is clear. US troops in Europe are staying, at least for now. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Despite the ongoing negotiations between the US and Russia, the Kremlin continues its terror campaign against Ukraine's civilians, killing 6 children on Friday. Meanwhile, high-ranking military officials from France and Britain arrived in Kyiv for talks with the Ukrainian counterparts on the possible deployment of their troops as part of a ceasefire deal. Such a plan is strongly opposed by the Kremlin. For further details, we go now live to our Kyiv correspondent Oskar Terzi. Good evening, Os. So, first of all, what can you tell us about this deadly Russian strike?
So a particularly barbaric attack on Kyiv, the central Ukrainian city. That's Zelensky's hometown. It's in the central Ukrainian oblast of Dnipropetrovsk. The death toll so far, 14 people have been killed in this ballistic missile strike, including 6 children. Now, the strike happened near a children's play area, which is why so many children are among the dead. The death toll may continue to rise throughout the night. Now, President Zelensky forcefully reacted to this attack, releasing a statement, 2 statements now, one just as we went to air. Let's take a listen to the first one that he published on social media following the news of the attack.
Russian strikes are daily. Every day people are killed. There is only one reason why this continues. Russia does not want a ceasefire, and we see it. The whole world sees it. Every missile, every attack drone proves that Russia only wants war. And only the world's pressure on Russia, all efforts to strengthen Ukraine, our air defense, our forces, only this will determine when the war will end. America, Europe, and everyone else in the world have the capacity to force Russia to abandon terror and war. And this must be ensured. We need peace.
Now, this attack brings the total death toll over the last 24 hours to 20 and 96 people injured. 5 people were killed earlier on Friday morning when a Russian drone targeted an apartment building in Kyiv in northern Ukraine. So it's been a particularly difficult day for the Ukrainian air defenses. And, you know, European officials, British, French officials are in Kyiv today, so they will no doubt be looking at this situation and thinking, how does it affect their plans in the case of any ceasefire? And while we keep talking about a ceasefire, 20 people are dead today. There is no current ceasefire on the ground, and these proposals are only proposals. They only currently exist in the world of theory. Russia's actions on the ground show a very, very different approach to this than the way Washington is. So as long as these talks go on, more Ukrainians are going to keep on dying if they do not come to some sort of solution. At the moment, it doesn't look like we're heading towards one.
That was Oskar Toji reporting from Kyiv. Thank you very much, Os, for this report, and of course, stay safe. EU Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius met with Polish MPs and government representatives on Friday to discuss the implementation of the White Paper and Rearm Europe plan, as well as further help for Ukraine. Brussels is already considering launching new financial initiatives which will allow for the continent's defence industry to grow. Sasha Farbach reports from the Polish Parliament.
Now, defense is a common good, a common value for all of Europe. Those are the words of Commissioner Andrius Kubilius, Commissioner for Defense and Space, who was in Warsaw on Friday, sharing his insights and also that white paper that he's been releasing about the state of affairs and the state of play for European defense.
It will be allowed for member states in a voluntary way to use the cohesion funds which are allocated to them to invest them into development of defense industry. Also, it will be allowed to use those cohesion funds for development of military mobility infrastructure. It means roads, railways, and so on and so on.
Now, with cohesion policy and cohesion funding, that could free up around 392 billion euros. Now, that can be used not strictly for buying tanks or ammunition, but definitely for other key resources, dual-use resources of infrastructure, military mobility, and very much also about that Baltic defense line potentially, or East Shield in Poland, vital things that need to be still scaled. And also looking further down the line, looking at investment from the European Investment Bank.
European Investment Bank, till now, till a recent period of time, till the last decisions, had a formal prohibition in their mandate that they are prohibited to invest into defense industry, defense capabilities. Now they narrow this restriction, which is opening a lot of new possibilities for EIB to use their huge. I hope that we shall be able to speak with them about possibility for EIB to invest into some kind of those big defense projects of common European interest. Among them, for example, one of the featuring projects can be so-called Eastern Border Defense Shield.
Now, he also praised Poland as he was here, addressing here also members of the Ministry of Defense and other members of Parliament in Warsaw, praising Poland's efforts, already leading also the rotating Council presidency, and also what Poland has done in terms of defense, and also stressing very much that NATO will always be that military arm of the Allies, that the European Union is there to provide certain instruments that are just not possible by NATO, and if there's a higher military expenditure needed, then he believes the European Union can deliver. Now, that's the latest from the Polish Parliament in Warsaw. Sasha Farbach for TVP World.
Poland is launching a social media campaign to prevent more illegal migrants from storming the Polish border with Belarus. It is designed to reach the inhabitants of the Middle Eastern and African countries who might be tempted by Minsk's propaganda and try to illegally enter the EU. Sonia Gatabyszczan has more.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has announced a media campaign to curb illegal migration, targeted at the 7 countries from which most migrants attempting to enter Poland come from.
Our message will be clear. The Polish border is airtight. Do not believe the smugglers. Don't believe Alexander Lukashenko or Vladimir Putin. They're lying to you when they say that this is the entry point into Europe.
This development comes as the Podlaskie branch of the border guard has recorded more than 3,000 attempts of illegal crossings from Belarus to Poland since the start of 2025.
Every day our border patrol officers, police and soldiers are risking their health and life protecting the border from illegal crossing attempts. Those behind this human trafficking operation are growing increasingly violent.
In an effort to address the situation, Poland recently adopted a new law allowing for a temporary suspension of asylum rights for individuals entering irregularly via the Belarus border. The law sparked criticism from many human rights organizations. Amnesty International's Deputy Regional Director for Europe commented.
These proposals endanger the rights of people seeking safety. They penalize people who may have been subject to violence and trafficking or lured to EU borders under false pretenses.
However, the European Commission, which highlighted that it was in close contact with Polish authorities regarding the assessment of the law's provisions and its implementation, took note of the backdrop against which it was adopted.
It is crucial to recall the current context. There are hybrid threats arising from the weaponization of migration by Russia, assisted by Belarus. These pose a risk to sovereignty, national security, and the territorial integrity of Poland, and also to the Union as a whole.
Poland was allocated €52 million by the European Commission in December 2024 to tighten border protection against hybrid threats from Belarus and Russia. Warsaw intends to use the funds to build an asphalt road along the border and purchase drones and other tech devices. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabiszczyn.
The EU is considering its response to new American trade tariffs. The 20% levy announced by Donald Trump may have a powerful impact on Central Europe, as Poland alone stands to lose billions of euros. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Diamond, has this report.
No, this is not Willy Wonka's golden ticket. It's US President Donald Trump's latest invention, a residency visa for wealthy migrants. But for countries around the world, there's nothing golden about Trump's tariff crackdown, from 54% for China, 46% for Vietnam and 20% for the European Union, plus the baseline 10% levy on many others.
What we have is a set of tariffs based on what they've been charging us. That's reciprocal. And those tariffs have come in and every country's called us.
So how did Trump land on his big numbers? Take a look at the EU. It appears the White House may have simply taken the trade deficit, divided that by total goods imports, slashed that in half again, and there you have it, 20%. China has already hit back at Washington, slapping 34% on US imports, but Europe is still weighing up its response.
I think it will negotiate and retaliate. The retaliation has already been signalled. They will target those products which are particularly sensitive for the United States, because they will hit what are called red states, those where Republicans are the senators or in the Congress.
One trade-reliant region expected to face the full wrath of Trump's thunder is Central Europe, including Slovakia, which produces the most cars per capita in the world. The country is known as the continent's Detroit, with car exports to the US amounting to 2.5% GDP, more than 8 times the EU average. That means America's new 25% tariff on vehicles will batter companies like Volkswagen. For Poland, uncertainty reigns, with a projected loss of more than 10 billion zloty or 2 billion euros.
Well, it's not good. It's not going to be a boost to our economic growth. We have done now a number of analyses, and depending on the assumptions, the hit to Polish economy is between 0.1 to 0.4 percentages of GDP.
Speaking to TVP World's On the Record, Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik called out the exclusion of Russia, which the White House insists is because the country already faces stiff sanctions.
This is music to Vladimir Putin's ears because Russia was not included into the tariffs list, right? With Donald Trump, we already learned to look at the actions and less at the words.
And Donald Trump's words are defiant, insisting his policies will never change. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
We do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
All for one and one for all. The Article 5 of NATO is still strong, according to US President Donald Trump. Nevertheless, Europe needs to spend more on defense if it is to repel the Russian threat. And to talk about NATO, the American involvement and more, we're joined by Elizabeth Brough, security expert and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, according to Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski, Donald Trump has confirmed that Article 5 of NATO is still in place. Now, is this a signal strong enough for Russia, given its appetite for territorial gains?
Well, the basis of deterrence is that the other side has to be convinced that you will punish whatever it is the other side thinks of doing. And the fact that we need to talk, that we even need to mention that Article 5 is valid and will be honored is troubling, because what Russia needs to hear is that there is no debate about Article 5. Article 5 is ironclad. Nobody will ever challenge it within NATO. And I think that is where NATO, frankly, has a bit of a problem at the moment. That said, it is good that at least it has been said today that all the 32 member states of NATO do promise to adhere to Article 5. That is, in the scheme of things, it is a good thing.
Well, the debate over the Article 5 took place because the US seems to be sending mixed signals concerning NATO and American troops' presence in Europe. Well, on one hand, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington is committed to it more than ever. And on the other, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says Europe should understand the US will now focus its attention and military power elsewhere. So how to interpret it?
Exactly how to interpret it, and what matters is less than how you and I it is less how you and I interpret it than how Russia interprets it. And Russia needs constant messaging from NATO and from NATO's member states that Article 5 is not in doubt. Will be changed by anybody within NATO. Everybody within NATO will stick to Article 5. And if you start raising doubts about Article 5, that is like throwing away defense investment, because you convince the other side by signaling that you are committed to Article 5. By doing that, you convince the other side not to try any aggression against your allies. Obviously, you have to back it up with weapons. But if you invest in weapons and then in your signaling sow doubt about whether you're committed to Article 5, then you're throwing money away.
Mm-hmm. Now, General Christopher Cavoli, commander of NATO troops in Europe, said during his hearing before the US Senate, let me quote, "Russia's war in Ukraine now in its fourth year has revealed Russia to be a chronic threat, and we see in the future it will be a growing threat, one that is willing to use military force to achieve its geopolitical goals." Now, what value do such warnings have for the Trump administration and the Republican Party, given the public opinion polls which show that Americans have largely changed their views on Russia, and more than a third of Republican voters view Russia as a friendly country?
This, I have to say, is a troubling development, and it's not just sentiments anymore. A key Kremlin negotiator is now in talks with Washington about potential new trade relations, and that is troubling because trade relations should not be improved as long as there is a war in Ukraine, and the war in Ukraine, as we all know, will end the moment Russia decides to withdraw. It is very easy, but it is troubling that there are these parallel tracks because it's if nothing else, it sends mixed messages to Russia about about how it should behave if we all were to stick with if we all decided to stick with the message that Russia has to end its war against Ukraine, then we can improve trade relations, then we can decide to improve general relations, then Russia would get a very strong message. That message, unfortunately, is not as strong at the moment as it should be. But I think what is positive is that in Brussels at the ministerial, the ministers, the foreign ministers have been unanimous and unison in saying that they are committed to Article 5, and in the scheme of things, that is a positive thing.
Right. Now, about the meeting, Ukraine says it has not been invited to the NATO summit in The Hague as of yet. Well, given that Donald Trump says Kyiv will never become a member of NATO, should we expect some, well, loosening of ties between the two, between Washington and Kyiv? I mean, between NATO and Kyiv?
Well, I think it is desirable, but what has been happening and deserves praise and attention is that the European Union has been inviting Ukraine and especially President Zelensky to various meetings. That sends a really strong signal. I think everybody remembers that in 2014, it was Ukrainians' desire for that country to join the European Union that caused Russia to, let's say, panic and then interfere and intervene in Ukraine. So the fact that the European Union, EU leaders have taken care to invite Zelensky to meetings in Brussels sends a very strong and very positive signal. Then, of course, it would be desirable for the same to happen within NATO. But I think in any timeline, EU membership will come before NATO membership, and the EU have been unequivocal in supporting Ukraine.
Now, lastly, the US General Christopher Cavoli, whom we already mentioned, has stated that Ukraine has managed to fill the gaps in its recruitment system and therefore has enough soldiers on the front line. Now, given Russian reluctance to speed up the peace talks, are we to prepare for long months of the so-called meat grinder in Ukraine?
What has become clear in this war, if it hadn't already become clear, is that the Russian leadership places no value on human lives. We saw it in Soviet times in Afghanistan when young men were sent to Afghanistan to fight a war that made no sense and for which they were not prepared, including conscripts, by the way. And we have seen a similar situation in Ukraine, not including conscripts so far, but we don't know yet where this will lead. But men sent to fight a war for which they are not prepared, and that makes no sense. It's not a war of, it's not a defensive war, it's a war of aggression, and makes no sense from any sort of military perspective. It is an ideological war against Ukraine for which Russian men are paying the price with their lives.
It is the war of attrition. Elizabeth Bro, security expert and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.